Hello. Now I'm going to present for you an analysis of the composition of the primeval history. I will talk in English, but this presentation is still with the Swedish text. Later on, I hope to make a completely English presentation. When I have been working with the primeval history now for a few years, analyzing the Hebrew text, I have noticed more and more problems if you try to follow the explanations the documentary hypothesis have for this part of the Bible, the first 11 chapters. This is very short and I only show you some points. And this is actually the first part of a presentation I have made, and this is from the creation story to the flood. The primeval history, according to documentary hypothesis, is considered to be a mixture between two, if you call them writers. I call them writers here. Doesn't mean it has to be one person, but doesn't matter for this presentation. The creation story is written by P according to documentary hypothesis. Then there are 6 Toledots, in the primeval history. The first is the creation story written by P. Second is the Toledot. Toledot means continued history, an account of a story of what comes after. In Swedish, one translation they have translated it continued history, which I consider quite good translation. But the word in Hebrew is Toledot. So I here use it in English. So the first, after the creation story, comes the Toledot of heaven and earth. Starting chapter 5, there is the Toledot of a man, or Adam. Adam and man is the same word in Hebrew. Then comes the flood story, which is you find in the Toledot of Noah, Noah's Toledot. And after the flood of this Toledot comes the Toledot of Noah's sons, and then last the Toledot of Shem, one of Noah's sons. As you see here, all these are considered to be a combination of P and P and J. The last one and the first one is P. I will say something about P as a writer. When you read about him, what is written about him, he is considered to have a very monotonous language, very stereotyped terminology, serious lacks in literary skill, and many word-for-word repetitions. I will actually say just one thing about the creation story here first, and that's about variation. I have analyzed variations used in the creation story, and actually only the repetitions. Variations in repetitions, when the writer is repeating something he has already said. Sternberg is a researcher who gives 5 examples of variations. The first is expansion, where information is added. The second, I think it's truncation in English, I don't know, I have to say, but it means trunkering in Swedish. Information is left away. The third one is you change the order of the words or what you tell. The fourth is you change grammar, for instance, between active and passive or other variations. And the last one is substitution. You change one word for another, which means about the same thing. And when I then analyzed the repetitions in the creation story, considered to be written by P, who loves monotonous language, who don't like variations, who want to have repetitions which are word for word, who lacks literary skills, then you should find that the repetitions that are used, there are very few or any variations. They are word for word repetitions, and they don't show signs of literary skills, good literary skills. The result in my analysis is exactly the opposite. If you see here the left column, there are the number of repetitions. Actually, I here use Westermann's, so he talks about the Tatbericht and Wortbericht. And you can, if you use another system, you can have another number of these repetitions, but that is not the point here. But here I have 9 repetitions from day 2 forward, and in these I have found 14 cases of expansion, 5 cases when information is left away, which is not repeated, 5 cases where you change the order, 14 where you change the grammar, vary the grammar, 9 cases of substitution when you use another word instead of the one used before, and also 12 cases which I don't see fit any of Sternberg's categories. In total, 59 in 9 repetitions. This is an extraordinary number. The creation story is jam-packed with variations. These 59 are just variations found in the repetitions. I have not counted variation in the number of words used. I have not counted different way, for instance, the different number of days. The first 5 is just Yom Echad, Yom Sheni, day 1, day 2. But in the 6th and 7th day, it's the 6th day, the 7th day, Yom HaShishi, Yom HaShvi. That's the in Hebrew. So this is exactly the contrary to what you should expect. The number of variations. If P is a writer with monotonous language, stereotype terminology, lacking skills in the writing, and many word-for-word repetitions, nothing of this fits. These are descriptions of P that you find when you read the literature about the documentary hypothesis. So if this is P, as he is described, then P has not written the creation story. If you really follow what the documentary hypothesis says about him. You can also notice that the writer has interest for frequencies. And you find frequencies 7 and multiples of 7, and the frequency 3 and multiples of 3. You don't find, for important words, frequencies with 2 or 4 or 6, or 8 or 9. It's only 7 and 3. Important numbers in the Hebrew Bible. And 7 times, for instance, the creation process is evaluated, and it was good, ki tov. 7 times you find, and it was so. Sometimes in the literature, when you about the creation story, you can find, here it should be another, and it was so. I think the reason is that the writer wants to use these frequencies, 7, 3. Also 7 words in the first sentence in the creation story. Multiples I can mention, 21 words in the introduction. I will come back to that a bit later. 21 times the earth is mentioned. 35 times 7 and 5 is God mentioned, Elohim. 35 words is used the 7th very important day. 77 words is spoken by God when he creates man. There are many more, and if you go to torejungerstam.com and read the thesis I wrote about the creation story, you find many more examples. These are just a few. So it's very clear that the writer is interested in frequencies. So that was all I say now about the creation story. The next unit, the Toledot of heaven and earth, is supposed to be J. In this Toledot, there are two narratives. The Eden narrative, chapter 2 and 3. And the history of Cain and Abel, which includes the narrative of Cain and Abel and the genealogy of Cain. So, two narratives and one genealogy. The normal, if you read about the documentary hypothesis, it normally says that I would say always says, that the Eden narrative is much older, or at least older. Sometimes you can find it's written already about 900 before Christ, and the creation story can be up to 400 years younger. These years can vary a lot, and sometimes they are much closer to Christ if you read what it's told about them. But it's always the Eden narrative which is older. That's the point here. If that is the case, the text in the Eden narrative cannot show any traces of to know the text in the creation story. If it wasn't there, of course, you cannot know about it. That is the expectation you should have. Before I continue, I will say something about verb forms in Hebrew. The vayikdol form, or imperfect consecutive, is the narrative form. It's used to bring the narrative chronologically forward, telling the story. Other forms can give background information, and if it's in a story in the Hebrew Bible, if there's an introduction, then which tells about the environment, tells about the situation, the time, the persons that are there before the story starts, then you use other forms. Very often katal, or perfect, or participle. There are also, of course, other forms, but the point here is that you have to understand the difference between the narrative form vayikdol and the other forms. So if you look at the creation story, the first two verses is, when you check the grammar, you notice that there is no narrative form used. It's perfect, bara, perfect, haita, and participle, merachefet. That means the conclusion is the story hasn't yet started. So this is background information, and it tells that Bereshit, in the beginning, or as a beginning. Bara, created God, the heaven and earth. God had created. It's something already happened. And heaven and earth, that is a merism, which means it's you take two, it's like I'm searching high and low. Doesn't mean I search high and I search low, but not in between. Take two opposite, heaven and earth, to mean everything. So you could translate it, in the beginning God had created the universe. Everything. Earth, the sun, the planets, everything you find there. But the earth was dysfunctional, you could say, with darkness, hoshech al pnei tehom, and darkness on the face of the deep. So the earth was not ready, but Ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. But the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, on the face of the waters. Something is about to happen. So this is an introduction. It tells what has already happened and what was not ready. The earth, after the 6 days, the earth will be complete, filled with life, but it's not yet in the introduction. And the 6 days are used to fill the earth with life. I will present that and explain that in another presentation later on. But the point here is we need to ask then, is there an introduction also in the Eden narrative? And the way to find out is to check where does the narrative form start. And if you do that, you notice it's in verse 7. And the Lord God formed the man of dust from the earth, or the ground, and so on. And what is before? That is the introduction. We will look at the introduction as a whole a bit later. So the Eden narrative starts with the Toledot formula. And when we talk about the composition of the primeval history and the documentary hypothesis, you should know that the Toledot formula is considered to belong to P. And this is J. But everything you know about the Toledot formula, how it's used in every other case, shows very clearly that I would say is consensus knowledge today, that the Toledot formula is beginning of something. It's like a heading which tells what will this unit be about. It's not the end of something. But because many of the modern Bible translators really believe fully in the documentary hypothesis, then this cannot be a beginning because, or this cannot belong to the Eden narrative because that's J. So that's why in quite a few translations today, you find that this is the story, this is the account of the heaven and earth, ends the creation story. So this is one of the things that really don't fit with the theory. So, but if we use actually I would say everybody knows today, that Toledot formula is the beginning of something, marks the beginning of a new unit. Then the first sentence, it's so often translated like this. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. In my opinion, this has always been, it sounds a bit strange. It doesn't sound good. It isn't a parallelism, even though you find the earth and heavens and earth here in the beginning and the end of this, but it sounds strange in my opinion. And that led me to try to analyze every other instance where the Toledot formula is used. And the result was interesting. At every other place, without any exception, the Toledot formula is always used as an heading, as a superscript. It is never, ever combined with any explanation of the time or the persons or the environment, what is happening or what has happened. It's always like a heading. The only thing what can be explained is whose Toledot is this actually. For instance, in the Toledot of Ishmael, it said Ishmael was the son that Hagar gave birth to Abraham. It was Abraham's son born by Hagar. Whose Toledot is this? But nothing else. And after the Toledot formula, almost always there comes an introduction where the narrative form Vayikdol is not used. and then the story starts. In one or two of the Toledot, where Toledot formula is, you don't actually have an introduction, so it can be left away. But normally, Toledot formula and then an introduction. So, what will this mean if I use this knowledge or this way of interpreting the Toledot formula here? If I understand this as a superscript, then it means that after Ele Toledot Shamayim Veharetz, which is on superscript, the first sentence in the Eden narrative is in Hebrew, Behibaram Beyom Asot Adonai Elohim Eretz Veshamayim. As he was creating them in the day of making ready, the Lord God making ready the earth and the heavens. That is the first sentence. And then some interesting things start to occur. If you compare the first sentence in the creation story with the first sentence in the Eden narrative, the first thing you can notice is that both sentences have 7 words, which is not a coincidence, I think, as I already showed you some examples of the writer in the creation story was very interested in frequencies. You also notice they both start with the same alliteration. Bereshit bara, b. And the Eden narrative, Behibaram beyom, b. You also find that all the words in the first sentence in the creation story is found in the first sentence in the Eden narrative, except from Bereshit in the beginning. You have bara, created, bara and Behibaram. You have Elohim, God. You have Shamayim, and you have heaven, and Aretz or Eretz, that's the same, the earth. So all these except for Bereshit and of course the object marker missing. Also, if you check notice the 3 last words in the creation story, which is bara Elohim la'asot, that God created to make ready. Also, these 3 are found in the first sentence in the Eden narrative. Behibaram bara asot and Elohim. If you check the whole introduction, also including the Toledot formula, you find that very many of these words are found also in the creation story, 26 of 43 in the Hebrew text. And among the words that are not found is Ele Toledot, this is the continued history, and the name of God, the Tetragrammaton. So, about 70% of the words in the Eden narrative, introduction in the Eden narrative, is found in the creation story. This altogether speaks about that the writer of the Eden narrative did know about the text in the creation story. He uses techniques for linking. Miller is the one who has given it the name concatenatio, which means to link together. That means that you can use the same word, theme, etc. as is found in the previous unit, or especially also in the end of the previous unit. Use that in the beginning of the next. It's a way to link together different units. Also, if you compare these introductions, you find similarities. In the creation story, it starts with telling what had happened. In the beginning, God had created heaven and earth. Then it continues to tell what is not ready. The earth was empty and void, or dysfunctional, with darkness over the deep. And the positive ending, the Spirit of God was in movement on the face of the waters. The same you find in the Eden narrative. First, what had happened? Yes, Where are we in time? Yes, in the creation process, when the Lord God was making ready the earth and heavens. But not all the plants of the fields was not yet on the earth, and not all the green plants on the field had yet sprung up. The word all can be also interpreted as no plant at all, but kol means all. But it can be interpreted both ways. I think, to understand it, that all the plants of the field were not there yet, but some were, because here's the explanation. Why were they not all there yet? Because the Lord God hadn't let it rain over the earth, and man was not to till the soil. So everything is not ready yet. But the reason is not that it was not created. The reason is there hadn't been any rain and there was no man to till the soil. And then the positive ending. Water welled up from earth and it watered the face of the earth. You can notice also if you on the face of the earth, in the creation story it starts with on the face of the waters, the Spirit of the Lord. On the face of Alpnei Hamaim and Alpnei Ha'adama. So there are many similarities. So this view that the writer of the Eden narrative didn't know about the creation story, it doesn't, in my view, it doesn't find support in the text. The empirical material, the text, doesn't support this. I think there are clear traces of the technique of concatenatio, linking together different units. This would, if so, mean the writer knew very well the text of the creation story, that one who is responsible for the Eden narrative. Then after the Eden narrative comes chapter 4, which is the story of Cain and Abel. But of that I will actually tell you in the next part of this series. For now I stop here, but watch the next film when you want to hear about the continuation in the text and how it fits with the documentary hypothesis.